I am Jen Burton. I live in Johnson, and I am presenting this really along with Mark Woodward up in the corner. Well, my corner, sorry, because we had a dear friend, oh my gosh, pass away this year, and I did not expect to cry. I apologize. I don't know why that's happening. Anyway, we had a dear friend pass away this year, and I helped with that burial. And Mark was the person, really, Mark and Dorgan were the people who asked me for that help. And so Mark was an integral part of this. So he'll be chiming in along with me. And I just want to say, feel free at any point to unmute and ask questions. I feel like this is very informal, so don't hesitate to just speak up. Before I forget, I am going to put a link in the chat, and the link is to a document that has all of the information on it that I'm going to share with you. So it's a Google Doc, and everybody who has the link has access to it. That's something that you can open and save so that you'll have everything that I'm going to share. I tried to make it a 1-pager, but it's a 1.5 pager. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Mark, do you want to talk for a minute?
Yeah, why don't I just set this up a little bit and get the ball rolling, because Carl was my very dear friend, and on a Wednesday morning I got a call from Carl's wife Dorgan out of the blue and said Carl had passed away. He'd had a heart attack and died. So needless to say, I stopped work. I did call Jen because she's my support good friend. And I went up to Dorgan's, and we cried and processed and blah. And at some point later that evening, I said, well, what are Carl's arrangements? What did he want to have done? And she said, well, he'd always wanted to be buried on the farm. And from being in the legislature, I knew it was possible to do in Vermont, but I had no idea of how difficult or not difficult it would be. And I think Jen will fill that in, that we're very lucky to be in Vermont, because Vermont is small. You can get information quickly. And at that time, this was in the beginning of January, it was sub-zero, really cold. And Dorgan was saying, well, let's find out how long the hospital can keep them in the morgue, because we sort of have this body now that we have to figure out how to green burial. And we called up the medical examiner, who, being in Vermont, I knew, and Dorgan got to know. And she said, well, you know, we have room for 3 people at Copley. He can stay here for at least 4 or 5 days. And so we started thinking, okay, let's pull together something. Today is Wednesday. Sounds like we need to do something by Saturday. And that's when I called up Jen and said, here's a present, Jen. I'm too upset. Dorgan is too upset. We're both in grief. We need to get Carl in the ground on Saturday. Help us with this. Find out what you can. I'll at bare minimum, I'll figure out how to dig a hole. And then Jen can take it from here, and I'll fill in little details. You know, I'll say one thing: we had to have a box built. We had to understand about green burial, what it all entailed. I'll hand it back to you, Jen.
Okay, thanks, Mark. Thanks for that little the context. So yeah, what we're going to talk about is based on personal experience, but it's also based on Vermont state law. And you'll see in that document there are links to some of the laws, as well as the document that the state puts out. Sometimes there are local ordinances that you need to know about, so it's always just good to check, with your town clerk. So it became law in 73 that Vermonters can bury their own dead, and that includes transportation, which is pretty important. The landowner can set aside a portion of their land to use as burial space for immediate family members, as long as it doesn't violate health laws and regulations. One of the things to think about if you're going to do this is to plan. Like, so you could plan where that's going to be ahead of time, which is pretty helpful. And there's a little more information later on why. The first thing that you need to start this process is the death certificate. And that for us was, I mean, it seems straightforward. It was complicated. It was complicated because we didn't know it needed to be registered in the electronic death registration system, and we didn't know what it took to get it there. So we had to figure all that out, which just took a lot of back and forth phone calls. So to get the death certificate, you need the primary care doctor or, the hospital, someone at the hospital, and a funeral director to fill out separate sections of the death certificate before it can be registered. And then the last person to do it, I think, or the funeral director, then submits it in the electronic system. And that has to be in there before you can get the burial transit permit. And that probably sounds like it is. The burial transit permit is so that you can go pick up your loved one and take them to the burial site. So before you can get that burial transit permit, you need a death certificate. Death certificate requires primary caregiver and the funeral director to fill it out and register it electronically. You can get printed death certificates from the funeral director also, because sometimes those are needed too. Side note, so I did it with expediency in mind. Like, you have this, I'm so sorry, you have this body waiting to be buried, and usually people don't want to hold on to it for an extended period of time. So at least in our case, we had a few days, but that wasn't a lot when a weekend was coming and we didn't know what we were doing. So you can do this in a more complicated way without a funeral director, but it takes a lot longer.
Yeah, I might add that this funeral director relationship was something that was voluntary on the funeral director's part. And we had no idea that, it's sort of a little kink in the process, as Jen said, that you can do it without a funeral director, but they have, I would say, the track is greased for them to be able to be in the data bank system where they can sign off and people believe it, I guess. We never, I don't think we ever hired a funeral director. I think we may have paid him something.
Oregon gave him some money, yeah. So the burial transit permit must be in place before the deceased can be moved from the morgue, and a funeral director can issue that permit once the death certificate has been registered. So that is separate. So the funeral director has registered the death certificate, but then he also issues the burial transit permit. And that was very confusing. We made a mistake or two with that. In our experience, we thought that we had to file the burial transit permit, and we thought that it had to be filed with the town clerk. And first we thought it had to be filed with the town clerk, that the body in the town that the body was in. So that was Morrisville in our case. But it turned out that it needed to go to the town where the body was going, which was Johnson. So that the funeral director knew all of that. We just didn't know to ask him initially. So that's just another key piece, is that after the funeral director files the death certificate, they can also issue the burial transit permit, and they know where it goes, which is the town clerk for the town that the person is getting buried in. So picking up the deceased was a whole other really big aspect of this, and I'm sure Mark will chime in a minute, but you'll need to check with the morgue about their guidelines for pickup. Mark will speak to that more because he dealt with that quite a bit more than I did. So they might require a specific container, or they might require a covered vehicle. We're going to say this repeatedly. Make sure the size of the container or box that you take to pick up the person will fit through hospital doors. Our box was like 35 and a half inches wide, and the doors were 36. Just like squeaked through. We really got lucky. Go ahead, Mark.
Yeah, and I would say that we, on Thursday, we realized, geez, we're going to need to put him in a box, because I had talked to the medical examiner and was saying, well, can we just put him in a bag and put him in the back of the truck? Because I know that's what my friend would have wanted. And they said, no, we're not going to let you have a body in the back of your truck without a box. So that precipitated building a box within 24 hours. Another thing that if you have time is nice to plan for. So we were able to line up friends of Carl's to build a box. They, again, like Jen was saying, I didn't know how big, just big enough to put him in. Luckily, it was half an inch narrower enough to fit through the hospital doors, or it would have been an issue. So that was, we got the box built, and that allowed the hospital, the medical examiner who was at the hospital, to say, okay, we can, we will allow you to take him home in the back of the pickup truck. Otherwise, they wanted a van, or they're used to vans and funeral directors and hearses, and you can understand that they don't want me stopping for gas on the way home and somebody looking in the back of the truck and saying, that looks like a dead person. So box it was. You're muted.
I know, thanks. Mark, do you want to speak at all to that, what that process was of picking the person up?
Why don't you speak to burial site, specifics, and then I can talk about the actual retrieval.
Okay, sounds good. We did not rehearse. So the container, we already talked about it a little bit, but it for burial in a natural burial ground, the body must be buried without a coffin. But alternately, it can be buried in a non-toxic, non-hazardous, plant-derived burial container or shroud. So we went with a wooden box. It just can't be a coffin, I think, because of how they're sealed, or I don't honestly know, but I think they're just not as prone to decomposition, I think. And again, make sure the size of the box.
That I would agree with that. Decomposition is important. They didn't want to vault. I mean, I think the big thing of green burial also is you're not embalming somebody. That was important. And besides the fact, Carl was super cheap and he wouldn't have wanted anything expensive done.
So there was a lot of questions for us around the town health officer and their role. And I will say, because this happens so rarely, when we would call the town clerk, everyone was very helpful, I will say. Everyone really went above and beyond to help. But sometimes we would call and, people we call wouldn't have the answer because they aren't doing this on a regular basis. So we kind of had a bunch of back and forth around the role of the town health officer, and really all they need to do is, confirm that the deceased didn't die from a communicable disease, because when it's a communicable disease, it changes the how they can be buried. And they use the death certificate to determine this. So cause of death on the death certificate is what tells them. Pardon the visitor here. Embalming, Mark mentioned, Vermont law does not require embalming, and the deceased can remain unembalmed or can be embalmed using non-toxic fluids. not going to go through all of these location guides, and you'll see here there are links, and those links are in that document. One of the things that was important though was about the depth. It had to be at least 3.5 feet deep. And it's measured from the natural surface of the ground to the bottom of the outside coffin. You know, there are a bunch of things around like not being close to groundwater or a water source. A lot of stuff around water. I'm sorry. Those are the things to check in terms of location, primarily water and the depth of the burial. And we did have conversation with some people who were saying, you know, you kind of might think you want to bury deep, but really decomposition happens, you know, up higher. And that's kind of what you're going for. So 3.5 feet is a good depth.
I would add that it doesn't, 3.5 feet doesn't feel like a lot when you put a 2-foot coffin in it. You know, so basically your coffin is 16 inches or less below ground. So that was disconcerting, but it's really, really what is needed.
This is a very small slide. You need to mark the perimeter of the burial location. And really you're doing that in part because you're gonna create a map. You'll need to create a map of the burial site. And then you need to record that in the town clerk's office. And the other thing to think about with that is that if you're gonna bury someone on private property, when you sell that property, people might not have access to their burial site anymore. So you might consider adding an easement to the deed that permits future access to that site for, you know, for family or whoever that might be. Mark, did we ever get to this? Did we do this? This still might be on our to-do list.
No, we talked with Rosemary at the town clerk's office, and she, like Jen said, everybody was very agreeable or anything. And in the end, Jen and my friend Howard Romero was able to use Google Maps, look down at the farm, and pinpoint the grave site because we knew it was 10 feet from a maple tree beside the edge of the pasture. He got a GPS location on it, and we were able to file that with the town clerk. I mean, our town clerk wasn't saying you can't bury him until I have the location. She was more like, get me the location when you can, as soon as, you know, because they don't want to have surprises 100 years from now when they dig up somebody's deceased body. They want to know what's in the land records.
And that's why you also need to put a perimeter around it. Marker. Yeah. Really, that's it. I mean, I told Dorgan, I was like, this isn't going to last really long. That's all the information that we have. Like, that was our experience, which we can probably talk more about the actual experience. But does anybody have any questions right now?
Hi, this is Lisa.
Hi, Lisa.
Do you want to share your screen?
Yeah.
So I have a bunch of questions.
Great.
Can it be a cardboard box? Because in California, I was able to do my sister in a cardboard box.
Yep.
Yes, you can. And I think though that the funeral home will sell you a cardboard box for more than you think it should.
Yeah, they did. I mean, they do.
I think for some reason I thought it was like $500 or $700 for a cardboard box because it has to be rugged enough to.
Yeah.
So when you talked about embalming and you said non-toxic fluid, what are you talking about? Because I've never heard of that.
I don't know, because that is information I got from the state site. You know, I didn't look into it because that wasn't something we were doing. Yeah, okay. So I can't answer that. I'm sorry.
And what do you mean by a perimeter? What does that mean? Is it a fence? Is it a
It can be
stones? Is it a, what does,
any markers, any permanent kind of marker. So it can be a fence, it can be stones.
so it has to be like around, something that's around the whole thing.
Yeah, and if if you're gonna if you're, say it's your partner and you are planning to be buried there as well, you'll want to mark it for both, for future. Does that
Okay.
make sense?
Yeah. And then the other comment I wanted to make, which is more of a comment than a, was,
That's okay.
If there wasn't room in the morgue, we kept my sister for 3 days just with dry ice.
Oh, wow.
And there's no decomposition, there's no nothing. So
Yeah.
he could have been moved to home right away
Yeah.
and been kept.
Well, and like Mark mentioned, it was negative 12 degrees. So it wasn't actually an issue, but there was so much back and forth and figuring things out that wasn't, it didn't really cross our mind until we had him that like, oh, this is going to be fine. Like, because he stayed in the barn overnight because
Right.
it was so cold outside.
How
So
did you dig the hole in the winter?
Mark?
I was a little nervous about digging a hole in the winter, but being shovel, I called up the local rental place for an excavator. And the first couple tries, it was not going to happen. But then once I broke through about 6 inches, it just came right up real easy. And this was in early January. So that I was able to do with an excavator. And pretty much anywhere there's snow in Vermont, you can dig in the winter with an excavator. You can always, and so I rented an excavator. We dug a hole, and I was, trying to think. We before people arrived for the ceremony, we had picked the box up with my tractor and drove it down and set it in the hole. Practiced a couple times to do that, because of the logistics of getting a box into a hole. Again, you need some speed in the hole, so the straps that go under the box you can save, or you have to throw them in the hole. So that's what we did. At the Saturday morning, he'd been in the box in the barn. We went down and tried it a couple times, and then we, after the ceremony, we filled it back in.
And those are some of the little logistic things that aren't included in the Vermont the guidelines, right? Of like, how do you move this heavy box and get it in the hole? Yeah, that was a lot to figure out.
I have some questions, Jen.
Is that
Abigail? Sorry.
Yes,
Yeah.
Go ahead, Abigail.
My screen is not working. So what if the body is not in the hospital? What if there's no hospital anything? Can it just be done at home?
Yes.
The hospital? Okay.
Yeah, I think I didn't read that. I think it is on one of those slides and in the information. Yes, if the person dies at home, they don't need the burial transit permit.
Then how do we go about getting the death certificate? If we still have to go to the funeral home?
You still have to work with the doctor and the funeral home. Yeah.
So does that mean they would have to come to the home, or we have to transport the body to the hospital?
No, you don't have to transport the body. I don't
Okay.
believe the body can stay, but I think the doctor and again, this is my understanding because that is not what happened with us. So I
Okay.
don't have experience with it, but my understanding is that somebody has to verify that they died and how they died, because they
Okay.
also have to make sure that it's not a communicable disease, right?
So what
But
is the deal with that? What is the deal with the communicable disease? What does that have? What is the point of that? What is it?
Well, if someone dies of, I don't know, I'm just going to pick like smallpox, not that that's going to happen here,
Yeah.
but it's just the worst
COVID.
sounding thing to me. Something that can be transmittable, then I don't think they want a green burial because of possible transmission. Again, not a health person, not an expert in any of that. But that's
Transmission
my
to what?
understanding.
Because it's going in the ground. So I don't, okay. Yeah, I'm not asking.
Yeah,
I'm
that's just a
saying-
Vermont state law thing. And I'm sure you could find out more about that.
Okay. Okay, great. That was all that I had. Thank you so much.
Okay, sure. Anybody else? Mark, go ahead.
I would like to add that the medical examiner, Jen, she played a really essential role in releasing the body from the hospital, and was really helpful all through this process, because the we had our doctor. As I recall, Jen, he didn't look at the back of the death certificate, which is where the funeral director got involved with the transport stuff, because Jen is running around saying, I got the death certificate, goes to the medical examiner and says, I want him. And she says, well, the death certificate, one, wasn't filed electronically, and two, the backside wasn't filled out by the funeral director. I'm not giving you the body. So, which precipitated.
It wasn't quite like that. I didn't go to get it and they said no, just for clarity.
Right.
But that was part of the process of figuring that out.
Yes. And the medical examiner who works at the hospital was the person who looked at the death certificate, looked at the transport permit, and then said, okay, bring a good box. And when we got to the hospital, with 4 or 5 of us, it was, they were incredibly helpful, very helpful at Copley Hospital, because I don't think any of us cared to actually look at his deceased body. I didn't want that memory in my mind. And so they said, he's in the morgue here. We'll take him out of this bag. We wheeled the box in. And a nice touch, I had filled the box with hay. And they put him in sheets, and him in the box, covered him up, and then they set the top on. We went in, screwed the top down, and with a gurney, managed to get him through the door, and then came back home. So that was.
Yeah, they were.
We were
very
very fortunate
kind
to have Copley Hospital.
Yeah, they were very, very kind.
Another question, Jen.
Yeah, go ahead, Abigail.
So my friend here, John, wants to ask a question.
Sure. Hi, John.
Hi, all. What about if you don't have a primary care provider? Can any doctor pronounce the death or give a death certificate?
Yeah, I think so. It just needs to be a doctor.
It
Yeah.
just needs to be a doctor. Okay.
Yeah, it's just easier. We had a relationship with this doctor. I mean, he's my doctor and he's Mark's doctor, and friends with Mark and Carl. So it was very easy for us to communicate with him. So we were fortunate in that way, and it was Carl's primary care or doctor. But yeah, I think you just need a doctor.
Okay, and then the funeral director, it seems like a funeral director is an integral part of this. So I guess the prudent thing to do would be to go to a funeral home and ask it ahead of time and ask if, will you be my funeral director, and explain I want to go to burial and here on our own property. And is that how you get a funeral director into this?
I don't think it would hurt to just, give them a heads up. But from what I could tell, I think they're pretty obligated to do this. I think this is part of their job, even though it's not you coming in as a family and paying for all of the service and everything. There was never a question that he was going to do these things for us. And in fact, when I would say like, oh, should I do that? Can I do that? He would say, nope, I've got it. This is my deal. I know what I'm doing. Like with the burial transit permit, I was like, oh, do you want me to take it to the town clerk? And he was like, nope, that's my deal. What I gathered from that was just that is part of their job, and they will willingly do that. Any of them. Yeah.
Okay. And let's see, the site. if we want a site ahead of time, have it all planned out, we go to the town clerk, and to make sure it covers all the regulations regarding proximity to water or anything like that, will the town clerk be able to, this may not be a question you can answer, but
Okay.
I guess I'd probably go to the town clerk and just start inquiring there as to,
You know, we didn't, you don't have to get the site approved by anyone, technically. Like, you just have to follow those guidelines. You don't have to go and ask.
like,
You just have to inform them afterwards. And you could inform them ahead of time, technically, right? If you had it planned out, you could file it with them early. But you don't, there was nothing about asking permission. And I can say that because we asked that too. And they said, nope, you just tell us afterwards, follow all the guidelines and then tell us afterward.
okay, and the health, what were they called? The
Health officer, something like
health officer. Does every town have a health officer?
that. Yeah, I believe so. Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay, sorry. One more question. My friend Jan Louise is asking. So it is required that we have a funeral director. There's no way to get around that.
No, you can get around it. There is. It's just really slows down the process.
Okay. So
The funeral director was just very instrumentally helpful. Yeah.
if we plan it ahead of time, we could actually go around not having to deal with a funeral director if it's all set up ahead of time.
They were a big part of getting that death certificate done and registered in a timely way because they're part of that death certificate process. Based on our experience, I don't think there's any real reason to avoid using them. They're really helpful. And honestly, he didn't even ask for payment. I think Dorgan just went and offered him some afterwards because of all of his help. So again, he was very gracious and helpful, and there was never any hesitation. And I don't even think he asked for money. So I would recommend using them because it'll really make the process smoother. But there is a link on there that says how to go about it yourself. You just don't have access to that digital registration, so it takes considerably longer.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Well, I think this will be my last question.
Okay, and then we'll go to Lisa.
As the property owner, myself and my wife can be buried on this property, but you can only be buried on a private property, as I understand it, if that's the case. What about, suppose Abigail was a permanent resident here and she wanted to be buried on our property as well? Would she be able to, would that work?
The documentation that I've read says family.
Just family, so.
I would inquire. So what I didn't mention was one of the people who was incredibly helpful was someone at the Secretary of State's office. I don't recall her name, but I called is it just the Secretary of State? I'm sorry, I don't remember, but yes, Mark is saying yes, that's who I talked to. She was incredibly helpful with this too. And we had some back and forth and some emails where she also shared information. She would be a good person to ask that question to, is the Secretary of State. I know that it says family. I mean, how do we define family these days? So that would be my recommendation.
Abigail.
Right. Okay, thank you so much.
You're welcome. Lisa, did you have a question?
Thank you very much.
Yeah, I actually had a question for Linda. So two things. One was, I believe that if you die at home with home health and hospice, you don't need your PCP to declare you dead.
Right.
Home health, the hospice nurses do. Is that correct?
I'm guessing that that's true. I don't know that because it's not my experience, but I would say that is. Or are you asking Linda?
Yes.
I'm sorry.
Linda will know this.
Okay.
And I would probably say the same thing that Jen did. I assume I know when my husband died, that's who I called the nurse, and she pronounced him dead. So
Yeah.
I think that's the way that goes. Mm-hmm.
Oh, go ahead, Lisa.
And the other thing that Linda was at a green burial with Mary and I,
Mhm.
They had a very ingenious setup to lower her in. She
Yeah.
was not in a box, she was in a shroud,
Mhm.
she died at the respite home in Burlington or Colchester, and then was transported by a funeral home in a shroud. And it was a pretty ingenious setup that maybe we should get a drawing of for other people. I was just thinking that as we were thinking about how to get bodies into the ground.
Yes, I wanted to mention that. You don't really even have to have a box. If you have the person in a shroud, if you have it has to be a sturdy platform sort of for them to lay on. But like, I don't know, maybe I think they use perhaps a plyboard, thin plyboard, board to lay the body on, and then you use 3 straps, one at the head, one at the middle, one at the end, and they are long on either side. And what you do is when you're ready to lower the body, 6 people hold the ends, the straps, 3 on one side, 3 on the other, and gradually lower the body that's on that piece of plyboard into the grave. And then when it's all the way down, they pull the straps back out, and the body, of course, is laying at the bottom of the grave. So no, you don't have to have a container for the person.
Yeah, and
If you don't want to.
Suzanne wasn't even on plywood. They had like
You had to have something stiff though for the
boards
body.
that because we were afraid she was going to sink in between them, and then we took the boards out before we lowered her.
Oh, okay. I didn't realize that. I'd be careful about that.
It was it was ingenious. I was very impressed. But and the other thing is I tried to save that document, Jen, but I don't seem to be able to do it. Do you think you could email it to me?
Yeah, I can email it to you. The link, if you have the link, you'll always have access to it. That's because it's a Google Doc.
Yeah, I would like the link as well. I don't know how to copy it and pay. Yeah, that would be helpful if you can email that as well to me.
Okay. How about, can I put my email in the chat? You guys can email me and I can reply. Would that be okay? Instead of me trying to write it down. Is that all right? I'll put my email in the chat right now.
I have a question.
Yeah.
Did you contact the funeral director yourselves, or was that part of the process when you went to the hospital and you had the medical examiner issue the death certificate?
We did that ourselves.
Okay.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that was us. I think I'm going to go back a little to the, hospice and home health people. In our situation, it was a sudden death that happened away from home. So, that's just what we're going on. I do imagine. I was also just thinking if you died of a heart attack, but we're at home, somebody would have to come to verify or whatever that might be. So anyway, different situations. Jen, do you have any comments or questions or anything? Yeah, you've been quiet, just checking in.
Yes, hi. I'm in the middle of, I'm close to the end of training as a death doula with Anne Keppel. So this is wonderful. This is very, very helpful and part of my assignments. I appreciate it.
Cool.
They're really helping me with that a lot. I guess I'm just thinking about this as far as death doulas and how I could be of assistance in this process. So that's just the lens I'm looking at it in, if that was my role.
Thanks for sharing that.
Yeah, did that come up for you at all, that title or that position, or was it separate of that? It was removed from that?
No, but Mark, when we talked about him contributing to this today, he did say something he hasn't said yet, which was, it was really, although I did cry at the beginning of this today, I was far less close to Carl than Mark or Dorgan. And it was nice for them to have somebody who was a little less emotional and a little less processing grief to take care of some of those logistics. So I don't know if you want to add anything, Mark, but that was just something that Mark found helpful.
Yes, I would second that. It was so critical to be able to call Jen and say, wow, we want to get Carl buried in 3 days. Start, thankfully he didn't die on a Saturday. So she had access to the Secretary of State's office, and she had access to the town health officer and the town clerks. And, it was quite a learning experience because, like she said, Jen went to the Morrisville town clerk and got the paperwork filled out because we were on the cutting edge. The Morrisville town clerk had never done this. Said, okay, I'll fill the town where he was going to. And I think this is immensely less complicated when you don't have to transport the body. If the person is at home and you don't need the transport permit, the hospital was not going to let me take him in a shroud. I wanted to. I would have taken him in a shroud and buried him in a shroud, and they were not going to let him go in the back of the truck without a box.
Yeah.
And that was our particular chief medical examiner.
And that's really why we're doing this, is because it was like there were just so many things, little things to know, but there's, there is a guide and it's linked in that, but it's very, there are too many words. Like it's a guide that's, gives you way too much information about burial in Vermont. Sorry,
It
Jen.
sounds like you, Jen, managed to be like that kind of death doula role for Mark, and that was really awesome. You got to step in and.
Yeah, I guess honestly, can you share what the definition really of a death doula is? I don't actually know, to be honest.
I'm trained to sit through the sort of as hospice, so to support during the transitional process and tending the body and home funerals.
Okay.
And the whole process. And so I should know all this. So I should be able to go in and say, oh, you need this paperwork. Do you need me to get it for you? Can I help you fill it out? Can I contact someone? So all of the things basically kind of fall under the heading. It's just someone to support during that process, which it sounds like you did basically. So
yeah, I guess I did.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think Abigail, did you have another question, Abigail? Is that what you were saying?
Yes, please. John has another question.
Go for it.
My question is, are there green burial sites in Vermont now?
Oh, Lisa is shaking her head. Yes. I think there are, but I don't know about them. Lisa, do you know?
Yes, I know of.
Oh, you muted yourself again. Sorry.
There's one in Marshfield. Linda, some of the others. And I just found out that there's a Jewish cemetery in Morrisville that allows green burials.
Oh.
So I'm actually in contact to find out more about that. And I think it behooves us to go to our cemetery commissioners and present green burials and try to see if we can get more of our local cemeteries. But the Marshfield went through I think it was Marshfield or Plainfield. They went through a really big process and they have a whole protocol. And I was going to type in, but since I'm now on, Jen, I don't know if you know that Linda is also a death doula.
Oh, no, I didn't. No.
I just wanted to.
Thank you, Lisa. That's really neat. Hi, Ruth. Welcome. I see you popped in there. Do you have a question or a comment?
No, I believe the town of Calais also allows green burials in at least one cemetery. And I know the Green Mountain National Forest in southern Vermont, there was a process going on. I haven't kept up with whether that's now allowed, but yeah, it's something I've been interested in. So I've kind of kept my eyes and ears open. The question for me might be, talking a couple of my sisters into being okay with that. And I wonder, do people find that families come to accept it? Like if I start talking about it now?
I see Jen shaking her head yes, and Linda shaking her head yes.
Oh, good.
If anybody has any information about how we can get a cemetery to include a green burial site, that would be helpful too. I and another person approached the Waltham, at the town of Waltham, and tried to convince the cemetery there to include a green burial site. They listened to several presentations over a period of several months, but they eventually refused us. And so it might be helpful in the future for people if they knew how to approach some of these people and get green burial included in regular cemeteries.
Yeah, it's a good idea.
Well, and I'll add to that originally cemeteries were probably all green. Maybe they were deeper, but they were all green. And one of the things that did happen over time was wherever they buried somebody, the ground sunk. And I noticed that this spring, that the ground had already sunk where we had buried Carl. Now, some of it was frost and some of it was casket or box, but I mean, just for their own convenience, I think at some time they said, well, if you put everybody in a cement vault, the ground won't sink, you know, and it'll be easier to maintain and blah, blah, blah. And it'll only add a few $1,000s to the whole process. So that, I don't know what the point is there, but I think that towns should be open to green burials.
The sinking was the reason that Waltham refused us. They said the ground will sink, and we said, well, we'll take care of it and mow it, but they wouldn't accept that. So just information that we went through.
Thanks for sharing that. Anyone else have any comments or questions?
It does seem to me that being a single person, that I can build my own box, but I'm not necessarily going to fall into it when I die. And so having friends young enough that are willing to do what you, Jen, and you, Mark, did for Carl is kind of essential. But then it sounds like, well, maybe you could get a death doula to help whoever is processing for your family to facilitate what your needs are when you don't necessarily have young enough friends who are going to do this process for you.
Yeah, that's a good point, Leslie. Jen or Linda, do you want to speak to that at all? Oh, Linda, you muted yourself instead of unmuting. That was so fun.
Yeah. The only thing that death doulas are really warned against is we have to be very careful about how we even speak of helping with funerals. The funeral association do not appreciate whatsoever when we talk about being funeral guides. You have to be very careful about the language that you use and what you do. But yes, a death midwife can certainly give you information, etc., to help you do a family, say, home funeral, by all means. So yeah, you do have to be very careful about that. They have certainly brought legal proceedings against death midwives in various places. So it's like you're usurping their rights, and they say, you don't have the training, you don't have the qualifications to be a funeral director. So, we cannot use those terms. Have to be careful. And I forgot, there was one other thing I was gonna say, but out of my head at this point, so I don't know. Can't remember.
Jen, do you have any idea how many green burials does, I mean, obviously the state of Vermont has to have some kind of record, or is it just town by town?
I
How
bet
many
I don't know, Leslie. I'm guessing based on our experience that it's town by town. But maybe they register it with the state. But what I can say is that, I think we were the first in Johnson, right, Mark? Yeah.
I think we were the first in Johnson, and I think probably Morrisville had never done one.
Yeah. Yeah, maybe. So again, that's why this is hopefully helpful, because, they haven't done them. So they don't have all the answers right there for the whole process,
Right. So
Yeah.
question for
As I
Lisa.
recall,
So Lisa, how did you find out about this particular cemetery in Morrisville? Were you asking different cemeteries or about who was available for a green burial?
I've been on the search for green burials for a while, and I was just
Okay.
talking to a friend who goes to the Jewish Community Center in Stowe, and she said, "Oh, there's one right in Morrisville." I'm like, "What?" So I emailed them and said, "I don't belong to JCOGS. Could I be buried there?" And they said yes, and it's more expensive because you're not part of JCOG. And so they have like lots of different levels of the burial, the green burial. Well, I haven't talked to the woman yet, but I've emailed. So they're having a site that's going to be completely green burial, so there's no marker or anything, and they're just letting the field go wild. And then they have a place where you could just be buried in a shroud, but have a marker. And then they have their regular burial. This is my understanding, so don't quote me on any of this.
Okay.
Where, Jewish people are never buried. They're always buried in a pine box if they're not in nothing, So there's no cement coffin anyway, but I'm sure there is embalming. I don't really know that.
Mhm.
But anyway, I'm just going to explore it. But I really want to approach Hyde Park. I'm pretty interested in approaching them. And I think it would be great to share information if people approach cemeteries about what did they bring and how did it go. And, I want to get like the protocols from other cemeteries to bring so they can see that people are doing it.
Right.
But I would love help with that for anybody who's living in Hyde Park.
I'd love to help.
Oh, good, Linda. Yes.
Very interested.
Okay.
And I was going to say that there is a way that if you end up in a regular cemetery, that you can ask for it to be as green as possible by not being embalmed. Asking, do they require the vault, the cement vault? If they say yes, ask if they will flip it over, throw away the lid and flip it over so the casket or the box, because you'd want one that would be totally compostable, could be on the ground itself. That's not, that's not totally green by any means, but it's a little bit greener if you don't have a choice, But yes, I'd love to, Lisa, I'd love to help with that.
Okay. You're on, Linda.
Good deal.
It would be really great. I mean, part of why I came today was I think sharing information when we all have these experiences, because I've been talking about that we should have a booklet that's very concrete, which we had when my sister died out in California. It was a very step-by-step, this is what you need to do. It was super concrete in terms of being easy to follow.
I tried to do that.
Yeah, well, I can't have, I don't have,
Yeah.
so.
I'll
And
get-
I would say, as I recall, when I called Rosemary, the town clerk, she said she forwarded me a booklet about this but it was from what, 2000 or something?
It was
It was
2014.
outdated.
But,
It-
and I linked the updated one on there, which is 2017. It's still not new, but it's way better than the 2014 version.
But I'm not just thinking about green burials. I'm thinking, you know, my sister didn't actually have a burial. She was cremated, but we drove her. So just like, what are you allowed to do and not do for all those different options,
Yeah.
I think would be super, super helpful.
Yeah.
Transport adds quite a little complication to everything. It certainly involves the funeral director, and medical examiner. The minute you move body, it gets more interesting and more complex.
But you don't actually have to have a funeral director. It's just a lot more, like you say, a lot more complicated. But I know of at least one who they did the whole process, you know, by themselves, took the body to the crematorium, etc. And you just have to find out all the different permits and whatnots. It's really complicated. And it seems to me the little bit that I do experience that I have had with it is that it almost can differ from like town to town, and different people know different parts of it and aren't sure about this or that. And it's confusing, totally confusing, you know. But you supposedly can do it without any funeral director involved. But that would have to be a home burial.
Thank you, Jen and Mark.
You're welcome. Thanks for coming.
I know
Yeah,
this,
thanks for coming.
Thank
I
you.
know this might not have been easy.
I guess it was harder than I expected. Yeah.
Jen made it much more doable, because there was no way Dorgan and I would have been, I mean, going through all this process of her, you know, the doctor signing the death certificate saying we're ready to go, and the medical examiner saying, yeah, you're ready. He's dead, but you can't move him. You know, he forgot to fill out the backside, you know, where the funeral director came in, and chasing down Morrisville, Johnsontown clerks, health officers, medical examiners, and then the Secretary of State's office. Thank God we live in a small state.
Mm-hmm.
And thank Jen was able to work her way through all these things that no way we could have done without her.
Thanks.
Thank you both for making time and sharing all this. It's very, very helpful.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you both, Abigail and John, for joining us.
Thank you very much.
My email is in the chat. If anybody wants me to send them a link directly to that document that I made, or just say hi, it's there. You can grab it before we end.
I guess one more thing is that there must be, I wonder if there's some Vermont Association of Cemetery people, cemetery commissioners in different, each town has their own cemetery commissioners. And if there's some kind of more statewide connection for cemetery commissioners where I can certainly approach the commissioners in Eden to, I don't know if they're going to be up for green burials the first time I mention it, but in terms of just saying, are you connected with a bigger association of commissioners where this kind of discussion, we don't have to keep reinventing the wheel, town, Eden to Hyde Park to Morrisville. We can go a little bit bigger and understand what other towns have done, or what documentation they've already created, or regulations they've already written up, so that it can be not, we don't have to do our homework all over again.
Yeah, it's a good point.
I love that.
Maybe.
So I'm happy to talk to the Eden commission, the cemetery commissioners, and I would be happy to share what my experiences are in talking with them, with other people's. And in this group, I'm not quite sure how we would connect email wise, or how people would like to connect in terms of maybe staying in touch and sharing our experiences moving forward. If we proceed ahead on being, making this happen for ourselves or our friends or people in our lives.
Leslie, how about you put in your email in the chat box for us? That could be a good starting point, or if everybody puts in their emails and we can connect, that's one possibility.
Okay, if I know how to do this, I'll try.
No, I was going to say mine is in there. If you're interested in being connected, you could all just email me and I can send the whole list out to everybody. That might just be easier. One point of contact, and then I'll share it with everybody. If you email me, I will share your email address with everyone else, unless you're emailing me for a different reason and tell me not to. How's
Thank
that?
you so much.
Okay, no problem.
Great. Thank you.
Does everybody have it who wants it? My email address?
Yep.
Okay, great. All right. I think it sounds like we're good to go. Thank you all so much for being here today. Really appreciate you joining us.
Thank you, Jen, and thank you, Mark, for helping Carl.
Yeah, thanks, Leslie. Really nice to meet you, Linda and Jen, and
Thank you, Leslie.
hear about the work that you're doing.
Thank you so much for doing this.
Yeah, you're welcome.